I'm so excited because I'm here with my friend Tara, Dr. Tara Cousineau, who just came out with let me see, her brand new book. I give these away like confetti, so this is
Oh,
another new one for me. But we're talking about change today, my friend. And you and I have been connected and interconnected for a long time and witnessed each other's changes, our babies growing up and new jobs and moves and
mhm.
all those life things that can be messy. And so I'm so grateful that you're taking time from your busy day to share a little bit about, maybe one change that you're like, wow, that really has affected me in a way I didn't expect it to. And that wisdom that you carry and still use, kind of like the hindsight rear view mirror, like, oh man, that was pretty profound, you know?
I have a word for that actually. I call it hindsight.
Oh, I love that.
Viewing your life experiences with tenderness and understanding,
Yeah, I love
when
that.
you're able to get some distance from it.
Yeah, you radiate that though.
Oh, well,
You radiate the kind sight.
well, I like to remind people, about sort of how resilient we are, and we don't know what we don't know until we know it.
I
So,
know.
yeah.
That's one of my favorite friends, who's actually a shaman, says, you don't know what you don't know that you don't know. It's kind of
Exactly.
confusing, but you really don't know those codes and keys of light and wisdom in you until something triggers it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true.
Is there anything? Oh, I love that. You can see your book in your back of you. Is there any one moment of life, childbearing, child rearing, I know that you're a voracious reader and study of, all things in the light.
Well, when it comes to change, it's so interesting. Once you get to a certain age and you actually have the arc of your life, it is actually interesting to be able to kind of, do these, kind retrospectives. Because when you're 5, you don't really understand that your world is chaotic. When you're, or when you're 10 or you're 15, and
Right.
you really have to kind of, um, learn how to face difficult things in life. And, I think where I've come around to, because as a clinical psychologist and I have conversations endlessly with people, I feel like I'm a professional listener, basically. So I
And you're
listen to many stories.
and you're so good at it.
But I think that we take on so much responsibility unnecessarily
Hmm.
that you know things are just really complicated. You were saying, like we've gone through our messy things, and I feel like we just have to continuously be a compassionate, be okay with being in a mess, like a compassionate mess, because life is messy. But there are things about change that I feel like this is where, because I have that spiritual side, but I am also a neuroscience geek, and that that it really helps to understand how our brain works. And our brain is tricky, like we try to rely on our mind and our cognition, but actually the way that our brain works is really tricky. It's
Hmm.
predicting, like we see what we believe.
Right.
And when we understand that the more that we focus on something, we're actually strengthening those neural networks, that
Right.
becomes stronger. So it
Yes,
becomes so important what you choose to focus on.
exactly.
Attention is everything in so many ways, right?
Exactly.
And so if you knew that if you focus on, I am not good enough, I'm an imposter, um, you know, focus on regrets, guess what's growing stronger in
Right.
your mind and in your brain? Those neural
Yes.
networks that are supporting those negative experiences, not that they weren't important in some way, but when you recognize, like, oh, that's where my attention's going
Right.
and that's what's growing. Like you're
Yes.
growing the weeds in your brain, basically. You need
Right.
to learn how to take that sacred pause and say, what is it that I want to grow? What do I want more of in my life? Well, if I want more love and I want more compassion and I want more, I don't know, forgiveness or acceptance or connection, well, you actually have to focus on those things because
Yes.
that is how your brain is going to make new connections and you're giving your brain new data, right? And so I feel like
Yes.
sometimes we think that somehow we just have to will our way through something. But if you understand sometimes the mechanisms, it really is pretty empowering.
Yes, exactly. Like I love that because in the moment, especially like you and I met because I was speaking about infertility
Mm-hmm.
and about the mindset around infertility, and that's what I wrote about, and how awfulizing throughout that whole month, you know, I used to say, I would ride that bus into, to Awfulville because it was connecting. It was making that neural net, that panic, that fear. I think too, for me, it's, you know, maybe you could talk about it, like that interruption of that train of thought. I find myself even at my age saying, okay, no, no, we're not going down that road. We're not getting on that bus. But, part of changing is changing within and changing how you disconnect that neural net and not feed that.
Right. And the first step is awareness, right?
Right,
And that's the tricky part also is that you need to be aware
right,
that that's what's happening in the moment. So when you have that moment like, oh, I'm not going there, like that's a beautiful moment. And that's a moment of choice.
right,
And just to know that, oh, the brain is designed by default to look at the negative, to look at the potential problems, to be constantly prepared because that's a survival mechanism
right,
in our wiring. And so the brain, it's like you can't help it. I always say, like, because I work with a lot of high achievers and perfectionists and people who think they're imposters all the time, and it's not their fault. Their brain is going to just kind of continually focus on that. But once you notice that that's where it's gone, you can
right.
say, oh, yeah, I'm not going there, just like you did. I need to go over here instead. And that takes a little bit of, I call it, it takes effort actually to do
It
that.
does. It
It
takes,
takes
and
effort.
it's not a one and done.
Exactly. It
It's
is actually like that metaphor of, fitness. Like, if you want to grow stronger, you need to go and, work out every day. But, you're not going to start with the 200-pound weights. You're going to start with the 5-pound weights. You're going to do it a little bit at a time over and over again
I love
until,
that.
that sort of that memory, that neuro memory, the muscle memory, whatever you want to call it, that's how you build that habit. And I think we underestimate the power of that, and we don't get taught it either. We just think
No,
like, oh, there's something wrong with me.
right. No, Lisa Johnson and I talked about pushing the river. And I said, in my 20s and my 30s and in my 40s, I was a really good, pushing the river. Like I was going to will things to happen. And how do you shift that? I even say to myself, am I pushing the river right now? I think I'm
Yeah.
pushing the
Well,
river.
it's such a good metaphor. We use this metaphor in mindfulness too, is that part of learning how to have that moment of awareness is that, your thoughts, your emotions, your experiences, can feel like the rapids, right? Going down the
Right,
river. Sometimes it can feel really mellow and calm, but we get caught up in that stream. And so the task is to actually get out of the river and sit on the
right,
riverbank
right.
and just
Wonderful.
notice that this is what's happening.
Right,
Oh, right, this is what's happening. I don't have to be in the river. I don't need to stop it, push it
right,
away, whatever. I don't need to be like, drowned out by it. I can actually go
right.
sit on the riverbank and say, oh, right, this is so interesting that my mind is going there. This is
Yeah.
this is conditioning from life, from experiences, from your own mind getting caught in that loop.
And childhood and all the
Yeah.
other interactions that you had that are out now somehow or other, SEO'd together in your brain. They're
Yeah, I
just
know. Yeah, it's true. But I think, talking about sort of childhood is, I think we also underestimate the significance of our early childhood experiences and how those get locked in our nervous system or in our, you know, energetic system. I say there's the physical and then there's the metaphysical. And it does help to look back and say, oh, where did this belief come from? How did I learn this? What was the message that I got? How did that, how old was I?
Right.
How long has this message been in my life? And then we can start to externalize that experience. To
Yes.
say, oh yeah, that was really crazy. My mom couldn't handle my emotionality and was sent me to my room, and I wasn't allowed to leave my room for hours. Like, what does that do to a little kid's nervous system, right?
Right.
It just pairs that that fear of punishment with shame, and that can
Or
just devastates.
invalidates anything that they're
Right.
feeling.
Exactly. No validation of feelings. And
Yes.
that's so hard now. You can step outside and say, oh, yeah, well, my mom was so overwhelmed. I totally get it. I'm like, okay, yeah, intellectually you understand that it's not about blaming a parent who couldn't meet your need in that moment, but it is actually understanding that you can meet that need now. Like you can take
Right.
care of that small part of you that didn't get that validation and then somehow made this association like, I must be bad, right?
Right.
And then where does that carry? Oh, my
Right.
job, or I get a feedback from my boss, and
Yeah.
and it's that old memory system that
Yeah.
comes forward. And so, when we understand that the brain works that way, because we don't want to forget those moments, um, but we then start to live our life in the like the past comes forward, basically.
Right, right. One of the things like you and I know, like when I was bringing up my children, I would say, "Oh, I'm think I'm triggered right now." Like, what am I feeling? And what, where, and if I was in a place to be, introspective, I would say, "When was the first time I felt this, and why am I feeling this way?" But even now, my kids say that, "Oh, I'm so triggered right now." And it's not a judgment. It's like that loving curious, being curious about yourself. Are you in love right now or are you in fear? You know,
Yeah.
which,
Yeah, and the triggers are often physiological. And so it's so
yeah,
important to kind of check in, like, how do you know that you're feeling that? Where are you feeling it in and around your body? And, instead of trying to do the mental gymnastics around the why, it's like,
right.
well, where? Where am I
Yeah.
feeling it? And I think that that's a good entryway to kind of get to that awareness that we were talking about before.
Yeah, this is lovely. I so appreciate it. I think is there one wrap up statement you want to say, Tara?
Well, I think that we can constantly and continually reparent ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
it's like a spiritual reparenting when we recognize, like, oh, that reaction or that experience actually has a long history, right? That's that hindsight. And to be able to say, oh, right, that's the part of me that feels this way in these kinds of situations. What does that part need that it might not have gotten before? And
Right.
it might be like that validation that you mentioned, or like, oh, you just have to give yourself a hug, or you need to call a friend, or you need to take a rest or a nap or something, and I think that we can be so much kinder to ourselves in that way. So I feel like it is kind of this like understanding that you got a tricky brain. It's not your fault. It's kind of efficient. It's going to repeat old patterns. And when you can interrupt those patterns and actually give your brain and your body some new data, it starts to respond in a different way. Yeah.
I love that. All your information will be under the video and
Oh,
a click to buy this amazing new book because part of us, that perfectionist side, we didn't talk about that, but the kindness and
no
realizing
one's immune, right, from perfectionism or the never enough
you're
syndrome,
right.
whatever you want to call it. We all have that, whatever, performer, producer, people pleaser part of us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope the beautiful nugget of being kind. The kind hindsight. I love that. Am I
Oh,
being
so
kind to
true.
myself looking at this?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to add that to my toolbox.
Right. How can I bring kindness or compassion to this moment?
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank
Oh,
you, Tara.